Welcome, everyone. The title of my talk today is Stories of Non-Native English Language Teachers Building Cosmopolitan Professional Identities in Australia. So unlike traditional academic presentations, I'll be engaging in research storytelling today with you in a dialogic way. So sharing background, narratives, posing questions, and offering provocations for you to reflect on and respond to towards the end of the session. So, in the meantime, as you engage with the ideas, please feel free to jot down your thoughts in the booklet provided. This is the booklet, and I've given you the hard copies so we can return to them later. So, before I begin, just a brief acknowledgement. Some of the online images used today are included for illustrative and educational purposes in both the slides and the booklets. So, acknowledgement of the country and place. I begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, on whose unceded lands I live and work, and pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. So, their languages and knowledges continue to shape education in Australia today. I also recognize this space as a place deeply entwined with histories of empire, migration, and multilingual exchange. So it is on such grounds that we gather across borders and traditions to reflect on language, identity, and education can move us toward more just and cosmopolitan futures. So when language held the keys, before we begin, I wanted to travel back to the first time you realized that language could both open and close doors for you. So hold that moment, the place, the people, the sensations in your body, in your affective embodied mind. Was it a welcome or a dismissal? Who held the power in that space? How did your voice sound and how did it feel in your body? So, in a moment, we'll place that memory alongside the stories I'm about to share. Trajectories and identity work. So, this study builds on several years of research into the lifelong lived experiences of professional identities of 16 migrant non-native English speaking teachers in Australia, tracing how these identities are shaped by intersecting spatial, temporal, corporeal, relational, and cultural linguistic trajectories. So, for many participants, professional becoming does not begin with formal teacher education, but is rooted in formative childhood encounters with English. Whether at home or in classrooms, community settings, or through pop culture and media, and in the negotiation of its value within local sociocultural contexts. So these early encounters often foreshadow later tensions and resources in professional identity. So shaping how teachers hybridize and navigate within new national, institutional, and linguistic topographies after migration. So, following migration, participants navigate layered processes of recognition and misrecognition, shaped by employment gatekeeping, accreditation policies, lack of support, and the subtle politics of language legitimacy at the intersection of race, language, culture, gender, religion, and the like. So, over time, their professional identities are reconstituted, though, through both constraint and agency as they craft prior educational philosophies, linguistic repertoires, and cultural resources with the demands of Australian educational context. So, this identity work involves not only professional competence but also affective fluidity, transcultural negotiation, cosmopolitan imagination, and critical professional innovation. Contribution, theory, and impact. So, drawing on hermeneutic phenomenology and narrative inquiry, the study produces the open ended and unsealed empirical theory, the hybrid professional becoming, which views non native English speaking teachers' professional identity formation as a fluid, non-linear process involving transnational memory, affective labor, and strategic onto epistemic creativity. The theory captures how teachers inhabit and create what Bhabha terms third spaces of practice, neither full assimilation nor rigid maintenance of origin identities, but hybrid relational spaces where professional and linguistic resources are remixed to foster inclusion and cosmopolitan learning and professional becoming. So the research has been substantiated through more than a dozen peer-reviewed publications thus far, public scholarship, national and international media engagement, and policy advocacy, contributing directly to reforms in some migrant teacher accreditation. So, by combining rich empirical narratives with sociocultural and critical applied linguistics, feminist, post-colonial, post-structural, Deleuze-Guattarian, hermeneutic, phenomenological, and cosmopolitan theoretical traditions, the study unravels the complex, iterative, and future oriented nature of professional identity among immigrant non native English speaking teachers, foregrounding its implication for more inclusive and socially just educational systems. So the thesis was graded exceptional and awarded the Molly Holman Medal in Education in 2024 at Monash University, one of the most prestigious awards in educational research in Australia. So in this award, each recipient is recognized for the excellence of their thesis and the significant contribution to and publication and impact of their research. Now this story. The needle and the seam. The air in the training room smelled faintly of instant coffee and the tang of fresh whiteboard markers, that chemical sweet scent of a space meant for thinking, but bound by its own rituals. Mahati sat upright in her chair, the laminated job advertisement folded with surgical precision in her lap. It still bore the faint brown ring from her morning tea, an unintentional watermark on a document already marked by something heavier. The words native speakers only had been carried in red ink weeks earlier, not by her own hand, but by a well meaning friend who thought it important she see the barrier before she collided with it. She stared at those words now, almost as if she could weaken their authority through the quiet pressure of her gaze. When the panel asked her to say something in your language, the request slid into the room like a fine needle, almost painless, yet invasive enough to leave a trace. This was affect in its sharpest register, the bodily jolt that precedes the tidy work of thought. Beneath it, rising like an undertow, was desire. Not simply to belong, but to belong without bending herself into a narrower shape. She smiled, holding the pause just long enough to reclaim the space, and then spoke in English, her voice carrying the cadence and music of her first tongue. Later, she would name that moment as living in what Homi Bhabha calls the third space, a place where contradiction is not a wound to be stitched up, but a seam that can hold two fabrics together without erasing either. Holding your cadence. So when Mahati smiled and spoke English in the music of her first tongue, she was deliberately claiming space. See, if you were in her seat, would you have met the request? Or reshape the moment to hold your own cadence, your own third space? Think of your first tongue, language, dialect, or way of speaking, and how it fares in your professional spaces. Have you ever been asked to perform your identity in a limiting way? Did you comply or redirect the space to fit you? And if you could reshape it now, what would your third space sound like? Brick by idiom. Carlos stood at the back of his classroom, leaning against a filing cabinet dented by years of moving and removing. Before him, students clustered in groups around the idioms gallery, pinned to the wall, laminated slips of paper carrying English idioms surrounded by their handwritten equivalents in Vietnamese, Arabic, Mandarin, Dari. Some students giggled at the strangeness of literal translations, while others argued over which phrase best caught the shape of an idea. Here, affect was laughter, the sudden, shared spark of recognition when a word lands in your own linguistic terrain. And desire, for Carlos, it was the wish for this to be normal in every Australian classroom, a world where translanguaging wasn't a temporary tactic but a sustained ethos. As Mikhail Bakhtin would say, the classroom had become a polyphony, multiple voices, none flattened into background noise. Carlos liked to imagine that if the education department walked in unannounced, they would see more than paper on a wall. They would witness the architecture of inclusion taking form in real time, brick by idiomatic brick. Echoes of belonging. Carlos's gallery made the classroom polyphonic, a space where every language found its place in the chorus. Now imagine your own learning space, professional or otherwise, alive with the languages that have shaped you. What would be on your wall? Which phrases or idioms would you contribute and why? Think of a proverb from your childhood that still guides you, a phrase you've heard at work that made you feel included or excluded, an expression that doesn't quite translate but carries deep meaning for you, a word whose sound, rhythm, or humor you've always loved. Mahati's sharper edges formed in the quarter corners of the staff room. One afternoon, over the tinny hum of the microwave reheating someone's lunch, a student told her, "You don't look like a real English teacher." The sting was immediate, affect again, but this time laced with a heavier weariness. She heard her father's voice from years ago in Punjab. Knowledge is the one thing they cannot take from you. Yet here, in this staff room, half a world away, knowledge alone could not dissolve the gaze that marked her as other before she opened her mouth. Her desire crystallized to become the kind of teacher who could bend, stretch, and subtly tilt perceptions, not only in defense of her own dignity, but for every student. Quietly learning from her examples, she began to weave Urdu Shari into her lessons, pairing each verse with an Australian idiom so her students could glimpse the parallel logics of two worlds. Every pairing became a small act of resistance, a delusion becoming other. Neither assimilation nor rejection, but a rhizomatic multiplicity of identity into unexpected and ever unfolding shapes. Not mimicry, multiplication. This moment surfaced in a cramped CELTA training room, even after completing a Master of TESOL in Australia, where the air conditioning hummed louder than the conversation. The facilitator suggested that multilingual teachers speak more Aussie to better fit into the school culture. The comment hit with a peculiar heat. T felt her jaw tighten, the affective flicker of irritation running quicksilver under her skin. In its wake came desire, urgent and unapologetic, to carve out spaces where her hybrid English accent wasn't a deficit to be managed, but a sonic layer of cosmopolitan identity, an unfinalized process. She imagined a professional world where teachers could speak in the full range of their lived voices, where transdisciplinarity drew not only from linguistics and education, but also from migration experiences, mother tongues, and community knowledges, where her work was not about mimicry, but about multiplication, albeit with a touch of ambivalence. Quiet solidarities. So over months, their orbits began to overlap. Conference hallways, faculty Facebook groups, the whispered solidarities of staff rooms, they recognized themselves in each other's stories, even when their languages, routes of migration, or educational systems differed. This was solidarity as affect. The quiet warmth of knowing that your struggles are mirrored in someone else's survival. Always becoming orbits, not lines. So, in the hybrid professional becoming approach, their trajectories were not straight lines but spirals, looping through mobility, othering, affect and desire, cosmopolitanism, and imagination. So, every crossing shifted the spiral, a student asking to lean, a greeting, learn a greeting in Punjabi, a colleague inviting Carlos to co-design a lesson, T speaking at a symposium on accented English, Laura publishing her reflections on translanguaging as teacher education praxis. So some changes were almost invisible to an outsiders. Others were seismic, cracking open spaces in which policy and teacher professional work could be reimagined. Mahati's pity on inclusive hiring sent ripples beyond her school. Carlos's gallery project was adopted in 2 neighboring districts, and T's refusal to speak more Aussie became a workshop case study on linguistic legitimacy. There is no neat resolution here, though. In Bhabha's third space, or perhaps more accurately, in the hybrid and tangled spaces they co-create, closure is neither possible nor the point. Their work moves in tides, advancing, receding, returning with new sediment. They remain in motion, propelled by the push and pull of desire, affect, building classrooms and careers that resist the tidy binaries of native and non-native, insider and outsider. And if you're to ask them mid-spiral what they are becoming, they might smile, as Mahati once did in that interview room, and answer, exactly who we already are, and more. So you're and more in motion. So what might that and more mean for you in your own professional becoming? Is it a skill you have recently gained or one you have learned to value differently? A form of cultural or social capital like networks, reputation, or shared language, a shift in how you're seen by students, colleagues, or your community, or perhaps a new way of producing or holding your identity, part of an accumulative process or perpetual professional becoming. Think of a moment where you felt your role expanding, not because of a formal title, but because of what you had lived, learned, shared. Okay, so here we come the summary of all the questions and prompts I've already asked you. So this is the time of reflections, resonances, and responses. So in terms of the memory and power questions, so the first door moment, so was it a welcome or dismissal? Who held power line? So for me, it was dismissal. The interviewer's question carried power. And third space or cadence question in Mahati said, comply or reshape. What would your cadence sound like? So in Mahati said, reshape maybe. So my cadence now carries my first tongue with pride. Chorus or wall question, your space alive with languages. So what's on your wall? Idiom, proverb, untranslatable, favorite word, etc. So on my wall, maybe Sodade, an untranslatable word that carries longing and memory. So and more becoming question. So what's your and more today? Is that a skill, capital, recognition, identity making, etc.? So, and my and more is recognition because being seen as legitimate affirms my identity. So the next step question, one practice to try this week. So idioms wall, accent legitimacy chat, inclusive hiring, professional development, etc. So the response from me for that would be accent legitimacy chat, normalizing diverse Englishes in staff room talk. So in terms of Q&A, so one context, one questions, we'll co-think policy, practice, and pedagogy. So my response for that would be inclusive hiring in schools. How can professional development embed linguistic diversity into recruitment policies? And here are my academic and public scholarships. Please feel free to tune in and read my works. Thank you very much for being here today and listening to my presentation. I hope to see you next year in the BERA conference at Manchester University in the UK. Thank you.